if you were here, I presented some videos from my camera traps, and you were able to see the herbivores and stuff coming through and what they did to the plants. This here is a bit more boring. I have my graphs instead. So restoration in general hasn't really focused on herbivory, and we'll get to that in a second. But herbivores are part of these systems. They were there first before we came. So that kind of answers why is this research important. On a different level, why is this important? Well, globally, I did a search query in Web of Science using restoration or rehabilitation and herbiv. So that would give me anything that had herbivory or herbivores. Between the years 1993 and 2022, I got 1,306 papers. Good start, but I refined them to exclude any aquatic papers because that's not what I'm interested in at the moment. After the refinements, I only had 938 papers. Not too bad. Started reading the abstracts, and for my mammal herbivory in active restoration needs, I only found 121 papers. Sorry, wrong way. That accounted for only 9% of those 938 papers. So worldwide, we have only 121 papers to look back on how are we going to fix this herbivory restoration issue. So just to orientate yourself with my site, you are in that bottom right corner at this very moment. And I had two farms just outside Glenconnor and one over the mountains behind Kirkwood. These two farms are hunting farms. That one is a animals are free farm. They just kind of left them do their own thing, and that'll be important in a second. Okay, caught in the act. These are some of my images. And so this is one of my data chapters. My key questions going into my research were, how do herbivores impact spectrum restoration? And is there a specific species that is most likely responsible for truncheon mortality? So these are just some cool images of non-herbivory plant squashing, if you will, that killed some of my plants. We have eland taking a nap, kudu fighting, and a giraffe sleeping for 5 minutes, which was pretty cool. So just my camera trap setup, what happened was we have our camera trap, and within the field of view of the camera, so I made sure all my plants were inside, I could see all of them. That's what the black dots represent. I also had a cage in the background to see if there was an environmental effect that also had any role to play in the survival. All of the plants were rooted and unrooted. Some of them were truncheons and some of them were fingerlings. That's just different sized material. Okay. Average number of visitations per day per species. As you can see, quite different across the three farms. For cab, we have impala, same for KDS, and in SCH we've got common duiker. Quite high values for common duiker as well. Let's look at what they did to my plants. So these are just proportion of species interactions versus visitation. So you've got your farm names on the top with the number of total images I got for those species and the percentage interactions. So how many times in those photos did the animals interact with the speculum? Then you have the species. In the speculum restoration literature, there are 4 papers that mention baboon and kudu are responsible for speculum mortality in restoration. Well, baboon had 0% interaction, even though we had nearly 2,000 images on the one farm. Okay. The other farms, there wasn't that many baboons that we saw, But again, when they did come through, there was no, they were said to have pulled out plants as soon as they were put in the ground. We didn't see that. They were interested in the plants that had already been pulled out. They were looking, we assume, for insects in the roots. Kudu, we have a lot more number of images for all the kudu on all the farms. I mean, pretty common game. And only about 1% on CAB and SCH had actual interactions. Now, I also just want to mention that has got to do with plant size as well because of preferred feeding height. Okay, next animal, impala. We had nearly 4,000 images on the one farm and about 10% interactions. 1,600 with 2% interactions and 18 with 11%. Now, I just want to mention that this 18 was only one event. They came through at one time, never saw them again, and they had 11% interactions in the photographs. Your common duiker, the one I think everyone's excited about, for those of you that know my research, we had in CAB, so this is the non-hunting farm, 69 images, 10% interactions. On KDS, 690 images, only 0.5% of interactions. And on SCH, we had 5,409 images, nearly 17% interactions. Steenbok, like, not going to go through everything, but 16%, 37%. You're going to see the animals are going to increase as I go through. Hare, which is what the animal I kept away from you guys last year. I didn't want you guys to know about the hare because I knew I was going to present this year. We have 26% and 30%. Then some extra animals that I only saw once. We have eland, also eating speckworm, springbok, and warthog as well. So I just want to jump back to the hare impact quickly. Normally, what I've seen on my camera traps is that the herbivores will eat the leaves, pull out the plant. If they strip the leaves and there's rain, and it has roots, there's potential for the plant to jump back, bounce back. If it's pulled out, there's rain, it has roots, has the potential to bounce back. Hares do this bark stripping situation, and you're then, they're stripping away into the actual, xylem and phloem and all that stuff inside the plant. Plants probably, can say with high certainty, will not bounce back from that. Okay, so my herbivore conclusions. These are preliminary conclusions. We need more herbivore studies before we can blame a specific herbivore. So I don't answer my second question because I do not have enough data on that. But we do see that herbivores do have an impact on speckworm restoration. But these herbivore impacts, and again, the species that are responsible for these impacts change. Now, I use land use an example, but that's probably not the right word. What I mean by that is the hunting perhaps plays a role, but also one of these farms feeds their game with citrus, and we notice that there's a big drop in the number of species that we see that actually ate the speckworm plants. So that's why KDS has slightly lower interaction percentages because we think they're full on citrus. The herbivore community obviously plays a role. If you don't have duiker, steenbok, hare, impala, whatever animal that the other farmer is having an issue with, bit of an issue, and your planting site as well. Depending on where you plant, also makes a difference. Okay, apparently I only have 5 minutes, and that's only halfway through my presentation. So individuals count. Now I actually look at the survival of individual plants that we put into the ground. Okay, so we looked at rooting versus unrooted material, and does proximity to other speckworm sites make a difference in survival? I'm going to skip this. So we planted around a rain event. It was completely by accident. And you can see during drought, the rooted material had, I think it was 49.6% survival. Okay? Unrooted material did not do well. During the drought phase, within 10 days, everything was sticks. There was nothing pretty much left. We thought that site was like goners. Then the rain came in November. We planted in December. And you can see there's a much higher percentage survival between 1 month after rain and drought, and even unrooted material was able to survive, even though there were herbivores that ate. Number of herbivores eating speckworm also decreased because there was vegetation around for them to eat from. And then you see this decline after the rain goes away. Now, the black dots are my caged experiments. So, if there are no herbivores, we had pretty much 100% survival, except for some reason, after rain, we had a couple die. Not sure why, but that's just how things go. Okay, open versus semi-intact areas. They were paired, one in the open, one in intact semi-intact sites. And so this was a trial experiment, so it's not from the farm I just showed you the image of, but you could clearly see the open, so there was no other food around is the like hypothesis, no other food around for them to eat, so they eat the speculum that is there. Much lower survival compared to the semi-intact. Again, cages had quite high survival with herbivory. So now the black dots do not represent cages, just saying. You see again, open, this is the average survival, so this is across the 3 cages. Those were replicates. You have lower survival in open versus semi-intact, but this survival is lower than the previous graph. And I think the reason for that is an environmental effect. And unfortunately, I can't say that with certainty because we were advised by the landowner not to put up cages on his farm because he had buffalo and he said they were going to take the cages out. So we didn't put cages, so we're not actually able to see if there was an environmental effect. Then we planted distance from a water source. It was a man-made water source. Cages, 100% survival. We actually didn't think on this farm that the plants would survive because the substrate was extremely rocky, and we didn't think that they would get that much moisture and all that from the ground. But you can see right near the water source, so 55 meters away from the water, 0 survival. Nothing survived, and that was because of impala. The impala came through and took out everything. And in theory, there's supposed to be an increase here all the way, but unfortunately, we missed a spring. So that's why there's a decrease again, because we had higher animal visitations near the spring site. Do I have time, Alistair? Yeah, go for it. Okay. I then ran a simulated herbivory experiment in the growth chambers in the botany department. And I had one growth chamber set to summer conditions, and average Kirkwood summer conditions, and the other one set to average winter conditions. And I had multiple treatments, very complicated. We're only looking at the unrooted stuff. I had rooted and unrooted. So my graph is season and treatments, but they're grayed out at the moment, and average root weight. So we're looking at how well these plants rooted in winter versus summer, and these treatments, which we simulated biomass removal in terms of stem length, so that's a bite, and leaves. So that was if they leaf stripped, for example, they took all the leaves off, like we've seen some of the Dakin Steenbok do, or if they had leaves. Sorry, I was supposed to show it. So that's just an example. You obviously don't want what's up there. They were then left out for 4 weeks in these growth chambers, and we then sampled them. This is what you put in the ground when you're starting your restoration. It's a full-length plant with leaves. You can see summer and winter, big difference in rooting. The same for if there is a small bite taken off the top and it has its leaves still. And when half of it is gone, but it still keeps its leaves, it still has quite a big difference in average root mass. So that's just all three of them. The defoliated stuff, you don't want this when you plant, obviously. You can see the full length plants, there is not much difference between summer versus winter. There's a slight increase in summer if you plant it in summer compared to in the winter. If it had a small bite taken out and all its leaves eaten off, and half length with no leaves, again, increase in summer, like pretty much nothing in winter. So the whole point of the simulated herbivory experiment kind of shows you that you don't want your leaves to be lost. It doesn't really matter how much gets bitten off the top, as long as it has leaves, it should hopefully survive. So plant conclusions. So potential ways to improve your survival when there are herbivores around is using rooted material, planting around semi-intact areas. Planting should not happen in the middle of a drought, and planting should not happen in winter. Those two are grayed out because I don't think restoration is going to follow those advice, but you know, that's just what my data showed.